I thought I raised a grateful son. Turns out, I raised a master manipulator who values his wife more than the woman who gave him life. On my 68th birthday, he handed his wife keys to a brand new Mercedes while sliding me a crumpled $5 coffee shop gift card like an afterthought. What he didn't know was that I'd been watching, listening, and taking mental notes for months. By the time dessert was served, I'd already decided to rewrite my $500,000 will. You won't believe what happened when he found out. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of my 68th birthday started like any other Tuesday in Portland. Rain tapped against my kitchen windows while I prepared breakfast for one. The same routine I'd maintained since Harold passed 4 years ago. The house felt too big with just me rattling around in it, but I'd grown attached to the routines that kept loneliness at bay. My son Marcus had called the night before, his voice carrying that forced enthusiasm he'd perfected over the years. "Mom, tomorrow's your big day. Jessica and I have something really special planned. You're going to love it." I'd felt that familiar flutter of hope, the same feeling that had disappointed me countless birthdays before. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe Marcus had finally learned to appreciate the sacrifices I'd made raising him as a single mother after his father abandoned us when he was 7. Maybe the thoughtfulness I'd tried so hard to instill in him I'd finally taken root. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 o'clock, just as Marcus had promised. Through the peephole, I could see him standing on my front porch with Jessica, both dressed in their usual expensive clothes that somehow always looked effortlessly perfect. Marcus wore a charcoal wool coat I'd never seen before, probably Italian, definitely expensive. Jessica's burgundy leather jacket caught the afternoon light, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the overcast Portland weather. "Happy birthday, Mom!" Marcus stepped through my doorway with the confident stride of someone who'd never questioned whether he was welcome anywhere. His embrace felt practiced, lasting exactly the right amount of time to seem genuine without actually conveying warmth. Behind him, Jessica offered her typical air kiss, the kind where her lips never actually touched my cheek but made the appropriate sound for show. "Margaret, you look wonderful as always." Her smile was perfectly calibrated, bright enough to seem sincere, controlled enough to maintain distance. In the 3 years she'd been married to my son, I'd never once felt like she genuinely wanted to be in my presence. Every interaction felt like a performance she was paid to deliver. I led them into the living room where I'd spent the morning straightening magazines and fluffing pillows, hoping to create the kind of welcoming atmosphere that might encourage them to stay longer than their usual 30-minute visits. The coffee table held a small arrangement of flowers I'd bought myself at the grocery store, a pathetic attempt to make my birthday feel special. "So, what's this surprise you two have been planning?" I settled into my favorite armchair, the one Harold used to tease me about because it was positioned to see both the television and the front window simultaneously. Marcus and Jessica exchanged one of those married couple glances, the kind that communicated volumes without words. "Well, Mom, we know how much you've always valued practical gifts." Marcus reached into his coat pocket, his movements deliberate and rehearsed. "We thought about what you might actually use, something that would make your daily routine a little easier." My heart sank before he'd even finished speaking. Practical gifts. That was Marcus speak for cheap, thoughtless purchases that required minimal effort or consideration. For my 68th birthday, he'd given me a generic gift card to a restaurant chain I'd never expressed interest in visiting. My 66th had brought a subscription to a magazine about gardening, despite the fact that I lived in a condo with no yard. Last year's practical gift had been a set of bathroom towels from a discount store, still in their plastic packaging. "Here you go, Mom." Marcus handed me a small envelope, the kind that usually contained gift cards. His smile was expectant, as if he genuinely believed he'd chosen something wonderful. "I've been saving up for this for months. I know it's going to make such a difference for you." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, already knowing what I'd find, but hoping against hope that this year might surprise me. Inside was a gift card to Brewster's Coffee Corner, the chained coffee shop 3 blocks from my condo. $5. The amount was printed in cheerful yellow numbers below a generic birthday message. $5. I stared at the plastic card, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. Not heartbreak, not disappointment, but something colder and more calculating. $5 represented less than Marcus spent on lunch most days. It was less than the cost of a single cup of the premium coffee he ordered every morning before work. It was exactly the amount someone might grab from a gas station display when they suddenly remembered they needed a gift for someone they didn't particularly care about. Oh, Marcus, this is so thoughtful. My voice sounded steady, even though my hands were shaking slightly. $5 will definitely buy me a nice cup of coffee. I'm so glad you like it, Mom. His relief was palpable, as if he'd been genuinely worried I might not appreciate such a generous gesture. I know you love your coffee, so this seemed perfect. Jessica nodded approvingly from her position on my couch, her long legs crossed elegantly, designer boots probably worth more than my monthly grocery budget. Marcus is so good at picking out gifts that people will actually use. He's incredibly practical that way. The conversation continued around me while I sat holding the $5 gift card, processing what had just happened. This wasn't thoughtlessness or forgetfulness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. This was deliberate dismissal disguised as consideration. Marcus had actively chosen to spend $5 on his mother's 68th birthday present, then convinced himself and his wife that this represented thoughtful gift-giving. But that wasn't even the worst part. Actually, Mom, we should probably get going soon. Marcus checked his expensive watch, the one I'd given him for his college graduation. We have another stop to make this afternoon. Another stop. Of course they did. My birthday celebration had been scheduled between other, more important activities in their busy lives. I was a checkbox on their afternoon agenda, efficiently handled and quickly dismissed. "Where are you two headed?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. "Oh, we're stopping by the Mercedes dealership." Marcus's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm for the first time since he'd arrived. "I finally saved up enough to get Jessica the car she's been wanting. We're picking it up this afternoon." My vision blurred for a moment. Mercedes dealership. The car Jessica had been wanting. After handing me a $5 coffee card, my son was taking his wife to collect a luxury vehicle that probably cost more than I'd spent on him during his entire childhood. "That's wonderful, dear. What kind of Mercedes?" The question came out automatically, part of the maternal programming I'd developed over decades of showing interest in my son's life, even when he showed none in mine. "It's the C-Class sedan, the one with all the safety features." Jessica's voice carried the satisfied tone of someone whose desires had been not just met, but exceeded. Marcus insisted on the premium package with the leather interior and navigation system. He said I deserve the best. She deserves the best. I sat in my threadbare armchair, holding a $5 gift card, while listening to my son explain how his wife deserved a $30,000 luxury vehicle. The mathematics of his affection had never been clearer. "You know what, Mom? I want you to see it too." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through what I assumed were photos from the dealership. He turned the screen toward me with the pride of someone showing off their greatest achievement. "Look at this interior. Real leather, heated seats, premium sound system. Jessica's going to love driving this." The photos showed exactly what I'd expected. Pristine white exterior, tan leather interior, technology displays that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security payment. It was beautiful, expensive, and completely beyond anything I could ever afford or expect to receive. "It's lovely, Marcus. Jessica is very lucky to have such a generous husband." The words tasted bitter, but I managed to deliver them with the appropriate maternal approval. "Well, we really should get going. The dealership closes at 5, and we still need to handle all the paperwork." Marcus stood up, already mentally transitioning to his next activity. "Thanks for understanding, Mom. I knew you'd appreciate a practical gift like this coffee card." "Of course, dear." I walked them to the door, maintaining the cheerful composure I'd perfected over years of swallowing disappointment. Drive safely with your new car. We will. Jessica's hug goodbye lasted exactly as long as her arrival hug, calibrated for politeness rather than affection. Happy birthday, Margaret. Enjoy your coffee. The door closed behind them with the finality of a chapter ending. I stood in my entryway, still holding the $5 gift card, listening to their voices fade as they walked toward Marcus's car, the one that would soon be replaced by something more suitable for a man whose wife deserved the best. Through my front window, I watched them drive away, probably discussing leather seat options and premium sound systems, while my birthday became a completed task in their rearview mirror. The house settled back into its familiar quiet, but something had fundamentally changed in the quality of that silence. For 39 years, I'd been making excuses for Marcus's behavior. He's busy with work. Young couples have expenses. He'll appreciate me more when he's older. But $5 had stripped away every rationalization I'd constructed to protect my feelings from the truth I'd been avoiding. My son didn't respect me. He didn't value me. He didn't even see me as worthy of the consideration he'd show a casual acquaintance. I was an obligation to be managed with minimal effort, a duty to be discharged as efficiently as possible. The coffee card felt heavier in my hand as I walked back to my armchair. $5. I'd spent more than that on the flowers I'd bought for my own birthday morning, the ones meant to create a welcoming atmosphere for visitors who couldn't wait to leave. I thought about the Mercedes dealership, where my son was probably at this very moment signing papers for a purchase that represented everything I'd never been able to provide for him. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd worked double shifts at the hospital for years to pay for his college education, sacrificed vacations and new clothes and social opportunities to ensure he had every advantage I could afford. And now he was spending more on his wife's transportation than I lived on for half a year. But it wasn't really about the money. It was about the message the money sent. Jessica deserved leather seats and premium sound systems. I deserved $5 worth of chain store coffee. In Marcus's economy of affection, his wife's comfort was worth 6,000 times more than his mother's happiness. The realization should have devastated me. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: clarity. Perfect, crystalline understanding of exactly where I stood in my son's list of priorities. Not first, not second, probably not even in the top 10. I was the obligatory birthday stop between activities that actually mattered to him. I walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept important documents. My will was filed between my insurance papers and medical records, a simple document I'd updated 2 years ago after Harold's death. Everything to Marcus, my only child, the person I'd assumed would carry on whatever legacy a middle-class widow could leave behind. $500,000. That was my net worth, according to the most recent financial statements. The house Harold and I had paid off over 30 years, my retirement savings, life insurance payouts, and accumulated investments. $500,000 that would someday pass to the man who just demonstrated that I was worth exactly $5 of his consideration. I spread the will out on my kitchen table, reading through provisions I'd crafted with such careful thought 2 years ago. Marcus would inherit everything, with instructions to use a portion for Harold's Memorial Scholarship Fund, but otherwise free to do whatever he wanted with the accumulated wealth of my lifetime. Looking at those legal pages, I felt the same cold calculation I'd experienced while holding the coffee card. This document represented decades of Harold's work and my work, years of careful saving and responsible financial planning. It was meant to provide security for our son, to give him advantages we'd never had, to demonstrate our love through the ultimate sacrifice of leaving him everything we'd built together. But what if love wasn't reciprocal? What if sacrifice wasn't appreciated? What if leaving everything to someone who valued you at $5 was just enabling the same disrespect that had defined your relationship for years? The coffee card sat on the table next to my will, $5 of consideration beside $500,000 of inheritance. The disparity was so stark it almost seemed like a mathematical equation waiting to be solved. I thought about Jessica's new Mercedes, about Marcus's pride in providing luxury for someone who deserved the best. I thought about heated leather seats and premium sound systems, about the genuine enthusiasm in his voice when he described her reaction to such generosity. When was the last time he'd shown that kind of excitement about anything related to me? Never. The answer came with uncomfortable honesty. Marcus had never been enthusiastic about my happiness, never proud of his ability to provide comfort for his mother, never interested in ensuring I had the best of anything. I was practical gifts and efficient visits, managed obligations and discharged duties. But I was also something else, the person who controlled $500,000 of assets he was counting on inheriting. The idea formed slowly, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. What if Marcus's inheritance reflected the same thoughtful consideration he'd shown for my birthday? $5. That number kept echoing in my mind as I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the documents that would determine how my life's accumulation was distributed after my death. $5 out of 500,000. That was exactly 1,000th of 1% of my total assets. The mathematics were perfect. I walked to my home office, a small room Harold had set up with a desk and filing cabinets where I managed our household finances and personal paperwork. His reading glasses still sat in the top drawer, alongside pens and legal pads and all the mundane tools of domestic administration. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and began calculating. $500,000 divided by the $5 value Marcus had assigned to me. That created a ratio I could work with, a mathematical foundation for rebuilding my estate planning around demonstrated appreciation rather than assumed obligation. But who should receive the remaining $499,995? That question required more thought than the simple math of Marcus's portion. I needed beneficiaries who would value an unexpected inheritance, organizations that served purposes I believed in, people whose lives would be meaningfully improved by financial support. The Portland Women's Shelter, where I'd volunteered for 10 years after Harold's death. They operated on a string-shoe budget, always struggling to provide adequate services for women escaping domestic violence. An inheritance could fund programs for years, maybe establish an emergency assistance fund for women who needed immediate help leaving dangerous situations. The literacy program at Roosevelt High School, where I tutored struggling students every Thursday afternoon for the past 5 years. Those kids reminded me why education mattered, why every child deserved someone invested in their success. A significant donation could provide scholarships, fund after-school programs, ensure that financial limitations didn't determine academic opportunities. St. Vincent's Hospital, where I'd worked as a nurse for 32 years before retirement. Their patient assistance program helped families manage medical expenses that insurance didn't cover. Harold and I had both benefited from their care during his final illness. They would use an inheritance to directly improve people's lives during their most vulnerable moments. These organizations had something in common. They served people who genuinely needed support, who would be grateful for assistance, who would use resources to help others rather than simply accumulating more luxury for themselves. I spent the next hour researching specific programs within each organization, identifying projects that would benefit from major donations. The women's shelter needed facility improvements and expanded counseling services. The literacy program could establish permanent funding for tutoring positions and student scholarships. The hospital's patient assistance fund could expand to serve more families facing financial crisis during medical emergencies. By the time the sun set over Portland, I'd outlined a new estate plan that reflected actual appreciation rather than assumed obligation. Marcus would receive exactly what he demonstrated I was worth to him, $5. The remaining $499,995 would support people and programs that made meaningful differences in their communities. The proportionality was perfect, the logic unassailable, and the message crystal clear. An inheritance should reflect the relationship between the deceased and the beneficiary. Marcus had defined our relationship's value with mathematical precision. My new will would simply honor his assessment. But changing my will was only the first step. I also needed to ensure Marcus understood the connection between his treatment of me and the consequences of that treatment. The lesson needed to be clear, the cause and effect relationship impossible to miss. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Patricia Hines, the estate planning attorney who'd helped me draft my current will 2 years ago. Patricia had been Harold's lawyer first, handling the legal work when we bought our house and established our wills 3 decades ago. She knew our family history, understood my financial situation, and would handle the revision with professional discretion. Patricia, this is Margaret Whitman. I hope I'm not calling too late. I was wondering if you might have time to meet with me this week about updating my estate planning documents? Margaret, of course. Her voice carried the warm professionalism that had made her so easy to work with during Harold's final arrangements. Is everything all right? Are you feeling unwell? No, nothing like that. I've just been reconsidering some of my beneficiary decisions based on recent developments. I'd like to make some significant changes to how my assets will be distributed. Certainly. How about Thursday afternoon? 2 o'clock at my office? Perfect. I'll see you then. The appointment was set, the plan was forming, and the mathematics were undeniable. Marcus had spent 39 years teaching me exactly how much I meant to him. Tomorrow, I would begin teaching him the same lesson in reverse. I walked back to the kitchen where the $5 coffee card still sat next to my old will, a perfect symbol of the relationship dynamic I'd finally decided to stop accepting. The card would serve as evidence, a tangible reminder of the day my son demonstrated his priorities with mathematical precision. But tonight, I needed to document everything that had led to this moment. Not just today's birthday humiliation, but the pattern of behavior that had been building for years. Every dismissive comment, every rushed visit, every practical gift that showed more consideration for his convenience than my feelings. I returned to my office and opened a new document on my computer. If Marcus ever questioned the logic behind his reduced inheritance, he would need to understand that today's $5 was simply the culmination of decades of accumulated disrespect. The full story needed to be preserved, recorded with the same careful attention to detail that had characterized my nursing career and Harold's accounting work. At the top of the page, I typed a simple heading: a record of demonstrated appreciation. Then I began documenting every birthday, every holiday, every missed opportunity for genuine connection that had brought us to this point. The words flowed easily, years of swallowed disappointment finally finding expression. Every gift card, every rushed phone call, every time Marcus had checked his watch during our conversations, every time he'd canceled plans because something more important had come up. Every time he'd made me feel like an obligation rather than a person he genuinely wanted to spend time with. By midnight, I had 12 pages of single-space documentation, a comprehensive record of how Marcus had trained me to expect nothing while giving me exactly that. The chronology was devastating in its consistency, a pattern of behavior so clear that even Marcus wouldn't be able to deny its accuracy. The document would become part of my estate planning file, available to anyone who questioned why I'd chosen to distribute my assets based on demonstrated appreciation rather than blood relationship. Biology didn't entitle anyone to inheritance. Love and respect and genuine care earned that privilege. Marcus had spent decades showing me exactly what I was worth to him: $5. It was time to return the favor. As I prepared for bed, I felt lighter than I had in years. The crushing weight of unmet expectations had lifted, replaced by the clarity that comes with finally accepting reality instead of fighting it. Marcus was never going to become the grateful, appreciative son I'd hoped he might grow into. He was exactly who he'd shown himself to be, someone who valued his mother at $5. But I was also exactly who I'd always been, someone who rewarded people based on how they treated others. For years, I'd been rewarding Marcus's disrespect with continued generosity, enabling his behavior by refusing to let it affect my treatment of him. That dynamic was about to change permanently. The coffee card would go into my safe deposit box tomorrow, preserved as evidence of the day my son taught me the most valuable lesson of my adult life. Actions have consequences. Treatment has returns. appreciation has rewards, and Marcus was about to learn all three principles in the most expensive way possible. The morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains as I prepared for what would become the most empowering day I'd experienced since Harold's death. Today, I would take concrete action to ensure my legacy reflected my actual values rather than my wishful thinking about family obligations. Patricia Hines' law office occupied the third floor of a downtown Portland building that had maintained its 1920s character while updating its functionality for modern legal practice. I'd been here twice before, once to establish Harold's and my wills 30 years ago, and again 2 years ago to update everything after his death. Both previous visits had been somber occasions, focused on mortality and protection and ensuring Marcus would be provided for after we were gone. Today felt completely different. Today was about justice. "Margaret, come in, please." Patricia rose from behind her mahogany desk, extending the same warm handshake that had comforted me during my most difficult legal consultations. She was about my age, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of professional confidence that came from 4 decades of guiding families through their most complex decisions. "You sounded quite determined on the phone. What changes are you considering?" I settled into the leather chair across from her desk, the same seat I'd occupied while making arrangements for Harold's final wishes. But this time, I wasn't planning for death. I was planning for accountability. "Patricia, I need to completely restructure my will based on some recent revelations about my son's priorities. I want to ensure my estate goes to people and organizations that will genuinely value what I've spent my lifetime building." Her expression shifted to the careful neutrality that lawyers perfected when dealing with family conflicts. "Can you tell me more about these revelations? Has something specific happened between you and Marcus?" "Yesterday was my 68th birthday." I pulled the coffee card from my purse, placing it on her polished desk between us. "This is what Marcus gave me, $5 to a coffee shop chain." About 30 minutes later, he left my house to pick up a new Mercedes he'd bought for his wife. Patricia examined the gift card with the same attention she'd give any legal document, understanding instinctively that this small piece of plastic represented something much larger than its face value. "I see. And you feel this demonstrates a significant disparity in how he values different relationships in his life." "Exactly. I've been documenting patterns of behavior for years, but yesterday crystallized everything with mathematical precision. Marcus has shown me exactly what I'm worth to him. I'd like my will to reflect the same careful consideration he's shown me." She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled in the thinking pose I remembered from our previous consultations. "Margaret, I have to ask, and please don't take this as judgment of your feelings, but are you certain you want to make permanent legal changes based on what might be a temporary emotional response? Family relationships are complicated, and sometimes people express care differently than we expect." "Patricia, I appreciate your caution, but this isn't emotional reaction. This is 39 years of accumulated evidence that my son views me as an obligation to be managed rather than a person to be valued. The coffee card is just the latest proof of a relationship dynamic I should have addressed years ago." I opened my folder and handed her the 12-page document I'd completed the night before. "This is a comprehensive record of how Marcus has demonstrated his priorities over time. I think you'll find it quite thorough." She accepted the pages and began reading with the same careful attention she'd given the gift card. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see her absorbing the chronology of dismissive gifts, rushed visits, and casual disrespect that had characterized my relationship with my son. "This is indeed quite detailed," she said after several minutes of reading. "You've documented specific incidents spanning many years. And you feel this pattern demonstrates a consistent undervaluing of your relationship. I feel this pattern demonstrates exactly how Marcus prioritizes his life, and I want my estate planning to reflect the same priorities. He's made it clear that his wife deserves luxury, while his mother deserves $5 worth of consideration. My will should honor those demonstrated values." Patricia set the documents down and looked at me with the kind of direct assessment that had probably served countless clients during their most difficult decisions. "What specifically would you like your new will to say, Margaret?" "I want Marcus to receive exactly what he's shown I'm worth to him, $5. The remaining $499,995 should go to organizations that serve people who genuinely need support and will genuinely appreciate receiving it." She made notes on her legal pad, her pen moving efficiently across the page. "And which organizations did you have in mind?" "I've identified 3 primary beneficiaries. The Portland Women's Shelter, where I've volunteered for 10 years. They provide critical services for women escaping domestic violence and operate on minimal funding. The literacy program at Roosevelt High School, where I tutor students every week. They help kids who might not otherwise have access to educational support. And St. Vincent's Hospital's Patient Assistance Program, which helps families manage medical expenses during health crises." "Those are all excellent charitable choices," Patricia noted. "Organizations with clear missions and demonstrated impact in the community. But I want to make sure you understand the implications of what you're proposing. This would represent a complete disinheritance of your son, leaving him with a symbolic amount that might be seen as deliberately insulting." "That's exactly what I intend. Marcus has spent decades training me to expect insulting gifts and minimal consideration. My will should reflect the same thoughtful gift-giving approach he's perfected." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the legal and emotional complexities of what I was requesting. "Margaret, I've been practicing estate law for 40 years, and I've seen families destroyed by inheritance disputes. Are you prepared for the possibility that Marcus might contest this will?"
He could argue undue influence, mental incapacity, any number of grounds that might overturn your wishes. Then I need to ensure the will is absolutely bulletproof from a legal standpoint. I want every protection available to prevent Marcus from overturning decisions I'm making with complete mental clarity and sound reasoning. We can certainly build in those protections. Comprehensive mental capacity assessments, multiple witnesses, detailed explanations of your reasoning, video documentation of your decision-making process. But Margaret, I have to ask once more, are you absolutely certain this is how you want to handle your relationship with your son? Once this will is executed, it will represent a permanent statement about how you viewed his treatment of you. Patricia, for 39 years, I've been hoping Marcus would grow into the kind of man who appreciated his mother's sacrifices and reciprocated her love with genuine care and respect. Yesterday, he demonstrated with mathematical precision that he never will. I'm done hoping for changes that will never come. I want my legacy to reflect reality, not wishful thinking. She nodded slowly, her professional demeanor acknowledging the finality in my voice. Very well. Let's discuss the specific language and protections you'll need to ensure your wishes are honored exactly as you intend. The next 2 hours were spent crafting legal language that would transform my years of accumulated disappointment into binding legal consequences. Patricia walked me through every aspect of the new will, ensuring I understood the implications of each provision and the protections we were building against potential challenges. The document would include a comprehensive explanation of my decision-making process, referencing the pattern of behavior I documented and the specific incident that had crystallized my resolve. Marcus would receive exactly $5, with explicit language stating that this amount reflected his demonstrated valuation of our relationship. The remaining assets would be distributed among the 3 charitable organizations I'd selected, with specific instructions for how the funds should be used. We also discussed the practical aspects of implementation. The will would include video testimony of my mental state and reasoning, multiple witness signatures, and comprehensive documentation proving that I was acting of my own free will without external pressure or influence. Every legal safeguard available would be deployed to ensure Marcus couldn't overturn my decisions through court challenges. Margaret, there's one more thing we should consider. Patricia closed her legal pad and looked at me directly. Do you want Marcus to know about these changes before your death? Some people prefer to inform their children about inheritance modifications, while others prefer to let the will speak for itself. The question hadn't occurred to me, but the answer came immediately. I want Marcus to discover the consequences of his behavior the same way he delivered my birthday gift yesterday, as a surprise that perfectly reflects the relationship dynamic he's created. So no advance notification? None whatsoever. Marcus will learn about his $5 inheritance when the will is read, just like I learned about my $5 birthday gift when he handed it to me. Patricia smiled for the first time during our consultation, a brief expression of what might have been admiration for the elegant justice of my plan. Very well, Margaret. I'll have all the documents prepared by Friday. We can execute everything early next week with proper witnesses and documentation. Perfect. And Patricia, thank you for taking this seriously. I know family inheritance disputes aren't always pleasant to handle. Margaret, in 40 years of practice, I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is let their adult children experience the natural consequences of their choices. You're not being vindictive, you're being honest about the relationship your son has chosen to maintain with you. Those words followed me home through the Portland afternoon traffic, validating what I'd known in my heart but hadn't been able to articulate clearly. This wasn't revenge, this was honesty. This was finally allowing the mathematical precision of Marcus's behavior to be reflected in the mathematical precision of his inheritance. The coffee card sat on my kitchen counter where I'd left it that morning, $5 of consideration for 68 years of life. Tonight, I would place it in my safe deposit box alongside my new will, 2 documents that would serve as permanent reminders of the day I stopped accepting treatment that fell short of what I deserved. Marcus had taught me exactly what I was worth to him. Tomorrow, I would begin teaching him the same lesson in return. And unlike his gift to me, my gift to him would keep giving long after I was gone, serving as a permanent reminder of the relationship priorities he'd chosen to maintain. $5 for $5. Perfect mathematical justice, delivered with the same thoughtless efficiency he'd perfected over decades of managing his obligation to his mother. The only difference was that my $5 would be the last gift he'd ever receive from me, while the lesson it represented would last for the rest of his life. The following Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that often follows life-altering decisions. I woke up feeling more purposeful than I had in months, my mind sharp with the kind of focus that comes from finally acting on convictions rather than merely harboring them. Patricia's office had called Friday afternoon to confirm that all documents were prepared and ready for execution. Today, I would transform years of accumulated disappointment into legally binding consequences. But first, I had other preparations to make. The Women's Shelter, Roosevelt High School Literacy Program, and St. Vincent's Patient Assistance Fund deserved to know they would soon be receiving substantial support. Not the specific amounts, which would remain confidential until after my death, but enough information to ensure they understood the importance of maintaining their programs and continuing their excellent work. The Portland Women's Shelter occupied a modest building in southeast Portland, its plain exterior deliberately unremarkable to protect the privacy of the women seeking refuge within its walls. I'd been volunteering here every Wednesday morning for 10 years, ever since Harold's death left me with time to fill and a desire to help others navigate their own difficult transitions. The work had taught me that survival often required making hard choices about relationships that weren't serving your best interests. Sarah Martinez, the shelter director, greeted me with her usual combination of warmth and controlled urgency. The demands of running a facility that provided 24-hour crisis intervention never allowed for completely relaxed conversations, but Sarah had perfected the art of being simultaneously welcoming and efficient. "Margaret, good morning. Are you here for your regular shift, or did you need to discuss something specific?"
Her dark eyes held the kind of perceptive intelligence that had made her exceptionally effective at managing both staff and the complex needs of women in crisis. "Actually, Sarah, I was hoping we could talk privately for a few minutes. I have some information that might affect your long-term planning."
We settled into her small office, where motivational posters shared wall space with emergency protocol charts and funding application deadlines. The juxtaposition perfectly captured the reality of nonprofit work, where inspiring mission statements had to coexist with constant financial uncertainty. What's on your mind, Margaret? You sound more serious than usual. I've been doing some estate planning recently, and I wanted you to know that the shelter will be receiving a significant bequest when I pass away. Not immediately, of course, but I thought you should be aware for future planning purposes. Sarah's expression shifted to the careful attention that nonprofit directors developed when discussing potential major donations. Oh my goodness, Margaret, that's incredibly generous. Can you give me any sense of the scope we're talking about? It would help with strategic planning if I knew whether this might fund a specific program or represent something larger. Let's just say it will be substantial enough to ensure the shelter can expand its services considerably. Maybe establish that emergency assistance fund we've discussed. Upgrade the facility, hire additional counselors. The kind of support that could transform what you're able to offer the women who come here. Margaret, I don't know what to say. This is beyond anything I could have hoped for. The shelter has operated on shoestring budgets for so long, always struggling to meet demand with limited resources. A major bequest could literally save lives by allowing us to help women who currently can't access our services. That's exactly why I've made this decision, Sarah. The work you do here represents everything I believe about helping people who genuinely need support. Women come here during the most dangerous transitions of their lives, and you provide them with safety, resources, and hope. That deserves to be funded properly. We spent the next hour discussing specific programs that could benefit from expanded funding. Sarah's vision for the shelter included a transitional housing program that would help women establish independent living situations, job training partnerships with local employers, and expanded childcare services for mothers fleeing abusive relationships. Each program addressed real needs with concrete solutions, the kind of practical impact that made charitable giving meaningful. As I prepared to leave, Sarah walked me to the entrance with the same protective awareness she showed all visitors, automatically scanning the street for potential problems before opening the door. Her vigilance reminded me why this work mattered. The women who sought help here needed advocates who understood that safety required constant attention to details that most people took for granted. Margaret, I can't adequately express what this means to our mission. We've always known we could serve more women if we had adequate resources. Your generosity will literally change lives. Just promise me you'll use the money wisely to help the people who need it most. That's all I've ever wanted from any investment I've made in others. The drive to Roosevelt High School took me through neighborhoods that had changed dramatically during my decades in Portland. What had once been working-class communities were now transitioning into something more economically diverse, with new construction filling empty lots and established homes showing signs of renovation and renewal. The high school itself reflected this evolution, with updated facilities alongside older buildings that had educated generations of Portland students. The literacy program operated out of a converted classroom where volunteer tutors worked one-on-one with students who struggled with reading comprehension, writing skills, and test preparation. I'd been coming here every Thursday afternoon for 5 years, ever since retiring from nursing allowed me to pursue volunteer work that felt directly connected to individual student success. Janet Rodriguez, the program coordinator, was organizing materials for the afternoon tutoring sessions when I arrived. Stacks of workbooks, practice tests, and reading materials covered 2 tables, representing the systematic approach she developed to address each student's specific learning challenges. Janet had been a high school English teacher for 25 years before transitioning into program coordination, bringing both classroom experience and administrative skills to work that required constant adaptation to individual student needs. Margaret, you're early today. Are we changing your schedule, or did you want to discuss something before the students arrive? I was hoping we could talk about the program's future funding, Janet. I have some information that might affect your long-term planning. We moved away from the student work area to her small office, where college preparation materials shared shelf space with volunteer training manuals and student success stories. The walls displayed photos of program graduates who had gone on to college, technical training, or successful employment, visual reminders of why this work produced measurable results. What kind of information, Margaret? Her tone carried the cautious optimism that characterized educators who had learned to be realistic about funding while maintaining hope for program expansion. I've recently updated my will to include a substantial bequest for the literacy program. I can't give you specific amounts, but it should be enough to establish permanent funding for tutoring positions and create a scholarship fund for students who complete the program successfully. Janet's face went through the same sequence of emotions I'd seen at the women's shelter: surprise, careful evaluation, and then genuine excitement as the implications became clear. Margaret, are you serious? This program has always operated on year-to-year grants and volunteer contributions. Permanent funding would mean we could plan long-term curriculum development, hire professional tutors to supplement our volunteers, maybe even expand to serve elementary students who need early intervention. Exactly. I've watched these kids work so hard to overcome educational disadvantages that weren't their fault. They deserve support that isn't dependent on annual fundraising or grant application success. This bequest should provide that stability. We discussed specific ways the inheritance could transform the program's effectiveness. Janet's vision included establishing a scholarship fund that would provide both financial support and mentoring for graduates pursuing higher education, expanding tutoring services to include college preparation, and creating partnerships with local employers who could offer internships to students completing the program. Each initiative addressed real barriers that prevented motivated students from achieving academic success despite their best efforts. The students began arriving as we finished our conversation, teenagers carrying backpacks and the kind of determined energy that had impressed me from my first day volunteering here. These weren't kids who took education for granted. They were working extra hours outside regular school time because they understood that literacy skills would determine their access to opportunities most people assumed were automatically available. Margaret, I need to ask something personal, if that's okay. Janet's voice carried the respectful concern of someone who cared about the people she worked with.
Is everything all right with your health? Making estate planning decisions often means people are facing difficult circumstances. My health is fine, Janet. I've just been reconsidering how I want my resources used after I'm gone. I want to ensure they support people and programs that make real differences in individual lives, rather than just passing wealth along to someone who might not appreciate what it took to accumulate it. Well, I can promise you that every dollar will be used to help students who genuinely want to succeed but need additional support to reach their goals. These kids remind me every day why education matters, why literacy changes lives, why investing in young people produces returns that last for generations. The afternoon tutoring session proceeded with its usual mixture of frustration and breakthrough moments. I worked with 3 different students, each struggling with specific reading challenges that regular classroom instruction hadn't addressed effectively. Maria needed help with reading comprehension strategies for her college preparation tests. Kevin required support understanding technical vocabulary for his automotive program applications. Jasmine was preparing for the GED exam while working part-time to help support her younger siblings. Each student represented exactly why this program deserved substantial funding. They weren't asking for handouts or looking for easy solutions. They were investing their own time and effort to develop skills that would improve their employment prospects, educational opportunities, and long-term quality of life. My inheritance would support their efforts the same way Harold and I had supported Marcus's education, except these students genuinely appreciated the assistance they received. The final stop of my afternoon was St. Vincent's Hospital, where I'd worked as a nurse for 32 years before retiring. The patient assistance program operated out of administrative offices that most visitors never saw, but I knew the location well from my years navigating hospital bureaucracy to help patients access services they needed but couldn't afford. Linda Chen, the program administrator, had started as a social worker in the emergency department before moving into her current role managing financial assistance for families facing medical crises. Her office walls displayed thank you letters from patients whose lives had been literally saved by programs that helped them access treatment regardless of their ability to pay for it. Margaret, what brings you to visit us today? Are you having any problems with your own medical care, or is this related to something else?
Actually, Linda, I wanted to discuss the Patient Assistance Program's future funding. I've been doing estate planning, and I want you to know that the program will be receiving a substantial bequest that should significantly expand your ability to help families in crisis. Her reaction followed the same pattern I'd seen at my previous stops: careful evaluation, followed by genuine excitement as the implications became clear. Margaret, that's wonderful news. We turn away so many families who need help but don't quite qualify for our current assistance criteria. Additional funding could mean the difference between people getting treatment and going without care they desperately need. That's exactly what I hope to hear, Linda. Harold and I both benefited from excellent care here during his final illness, and I've seen how the program helps families navigate medical expenses that insurance doesn't cover. This bequest should ensure you can expand services to help more people during their most vulnerable times. We spent 45 minutes discussing specific ways additional funding could improve the program's effectiveness. Linda's vision included expanding eligibility criteria to help more working families who made too much money to qualify for government assistance but not enough to handle major medical expenses, establishing partnerships with specialty clinics that could provide discounted services to program participants, and creating an emergency fund for people who needed immediate assistance during medical crises. Every initiative addressed real problems that affected real people during some of the most difficult periods of their lives. Medical emergencies didn't respect financial planning, and insurance coverage often fell short of actual expenses. The Patient Assistance Program filled those gaps with direct, practical support that meant families could focus on health recovery rather than financial ruin. As we concluded our meeting, Linda walked me through the same hospital corridors where I'd spent decades caring for patients and their families. The familiar sounds and smells brought back memories of why I'd chosen nursing as a career and why I'd found the work meaningful even during its most challenging periods. This hospital represented everything I valued about service to others, professional competence applied to human need, and institutional support for individual welfare. Margaret, I want you to know that this bequest represents more than just financial support. It validates the importance of what we're trying to accomplish here. The idea that healthcare should be accessible to everyone regardless of their economic circumstances. That's exactly why I've made this decision, Linda. Healthcare is too important to be rationed based on people's ability to pay, and families shouldn't have to choose between medical treatment and financial stability. This inheritance should help ensure that choice doesn't have to be made as often. The drive home through Portland's late afternoon traffic gave me time to process the day's conversations and prepare for tomorrow's will execution. 3 organizations, 3 different approaches to helping people during transitions and crises, 3 deserving recipients for the resources Marcus had assumed would automatically pass to him regardless of how he treated the person who'd accumulated those resources. Each program director had responded with genuine appreciation, specific plans for using additional funding effectively, and clear understanding of how the support would improve their ability to serve people who genuinely needed assistance. Their reactions contrasted sharply with Marcus's casual assumption that my resources existed primarily for his benefit, regardless of whether he demonstrated any appreciation for my sacrifices to accumulate those resources. The mathematics remained perfect. $5 of demonstrated appreciation warranted $5 of inheritance. The remaining $499,995 would support people and programs that understood the value of what they were receiving and would use it to help others rather than simply purchasing more luxury items for people who already had everything they needed. But executing the will was only the beginning of the lesson I intended to teach Marcus. He also needed to understand the connection between his treatment of me and the consequences of that treatment. The cause and effect relationship needed to be absolutely clear, impossible to misinterpret as arbitrary vindictiveness rather than logical response to demonstrated priorities. That evening, I drafted a letter that would eventually be delivered along with his $5 inheritance, explaining the mathematical precision of the decision and the years of accumulated evidence that had led to this conclusion. The letter needed to be factual rather than emotional, documented rather than accusatory, educational rather than simply punitive. Marcus had spent 39 years teaching me exactly what I was worth to him. The letter would explain how he'd succeeded in that educational process and what grades he'd earned through consistent demonstration of his values and priorities. $5 worth of consideration had produced $5 worth of inheritance, while genuine appreciation and demonstrated respect had produced substantial bequests for organizations that understood the value of the support they received. The proportionality was mathematically elegant, morally sound, and pedagogically effective. Marcus would learn the same lesson I'd learned about the connection between treatment and consequences, except his education would continue for the rest of his life, while mine had only taken one birthday gift to complete. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of Pacific Northwest drizzle that made indoor activities seem particularly appealing. Patricia's law office provided exactly the right atmosphere for the serious business of transforming lifetime accumulations into permanent legal consequences, and I arrived with all the documents and evidence needed to ensure my new will would withstand any challenge Marcus might attempt. The execution process required multiple witnesses, video documentation of my mental state and decision-making capacity, and detailed explanation of the reasoning behind my inheritance decisions. Patricia had arranged for Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a geriatric psychiatrist, to conduct a comprehensive mental capacity assessment that would eliminate any possibility of Marcus claiming I'd been mentally incompetent when making these changes. Dr. Warren's evaluation covered cognitive function, memory, decision-making capacity, and understanding of consequences in exhaustive detail. She asked about my medical history, current medications, family relationships, financial understanding, and specific motivations for the inheritance modifications I was implementing.
The assessment took over an hour and concluded with her professional opinion that I was demonstrating exceptional mental clarity, logical reasoning, and complete understanding of the legal and family implications of my decisions. Margaret, based on my examination, you are clearly competent to make these estate planning decisions. Your reasoning is sound, your understanding of consequences is complete, and your mental faculties are functioning at a very high level. I'll provide written documentation of this assessment for your legal file. Thank you, Dr. Warren. I want to ensure there's no possibility of my son claiming I wasn't thinking clearly when I decided to distribute my assets based on demonstrated appreciation rather than assumed obligation. The will execution itself proceeded with ceremonial precision. Patricia read each provision aloud, ensuring I understood every aspect of the document I was signing. Marcus would receive exactly $5, with explicit reference to the gift card he'd given me and the pattern of behavior it represented. The Portland Women's Shelter would receive $200,000 to establish their emergency assistance fund and facility upgrades. Roosevelt High School's literacy program would receive $150,000 for permanent tutoring positions and student scholarships. St. Vincent's Patient Assistance Program would receive $149,995 to expand their services and create emergency support capabilities. The mathematical precision satisfied my engineering-trained mind, while the moral logic appealed to my nursing-developed sense of justice. Resources should flow to people and programs that would use them effectively to help others, not simply accumulate more luxury for people who already had everything they needed and had demonstrated no appreciation for the sacrifices that made their comfort possible. 3 witnesses signed the document, each confirming they had observed me executing the will voluntarily, with full understanding of its contents, and without external pressure or influence. Patricia's video camera recorded my statement explaining the reasoning behind my decisions, creating permanent documentation of my mental state and motivations that would make any legal challenge extremely difficult to sustain. Margaret, this will is now legally binding and protected against virtually any challenge your son might attempt. The mental capacity assessment, multiple witnesses, detailed reasoning, and video documentation create multiple layers of protection for your wishes. Perfect. I want Marcus to understand that these consequences are permanent, not temporary emotional reactions that might be overturned through legal maneuvering or family pressure. One final detail remained: the delivery mechanism for Marcus's inheritance and the explanatory letter that would help him understand the educational value of receiving exactly what he demonstrated I was worth to him.
Patricia suggested using a separate attorney to handle this delivery, ensuring that Marcus would receive his $5 inheritance through official legal channels that emphasized the permanent, considered nature of the decision. We can arrange for the inheritance delivery to occur through Samuel Morrison's office. He specializes in probate law and has handled similar situations where family members needed to understand the finality of inheritance decisions. His presentation of the $5 and accompanying letter will make clear that this represents the completed execution of your carefully considered wishes. That sounds ideal, Patricia. I want the delivery to have the same formal weight as any other inheritance distribution, emphasizing that $5 represents the precise mathematical value Marcus assigned to our relationship through his consistent behavior over many years. The completed will sat in Patricia's safe alongside the supporting documentation that protected it from any challenge Marcus might attempt. Dr. Warren's mental capacity assessment, witness statements, video testimony, and comprehensive behavioral documentation created an impenetrable legal foundation for consequences that reflected demonstrated appreciation rather than assumed obligation. Walking out of Patricia's office, I felt the same sense of completion that had characterized the best moments of my nursing career, when complex medical problems were finally diagnosed correctly and appropriate treatment could be implemented effectively. Marcus's inheritance accurately reflected his treatment of me, while deserving organizations would receive support that matched their appreciation for what they were being given. The lesson was now legally binding, mathematically precise, and educationally permanent. Marcus had 39 years to learn what genuine appreciation looked like and how it differed from the casual disrespect he'd perfected. Instead, he'd chosen to demonstrate exactly what I was worth to him through consistent behavior culminating in a $5 birthday gift. My new will simply honored his assessment with the same mathematical precision he'd applied to valuing our relationship. $5 of demonstrated worth had produced $5 of inheritance, while organizations that served others would receive the bulk of resources they would use to help people who genuinely needed support and would genuinely appreciate receiving it. The engineering approach to human relationships had produced elegant results. Variables had been measured accurately, consequences had been calculated precisely, and outcomes had been designed to reflect demonstrated values rather than wishful thinking about family obligations that clearly didn't exist. Marcus would spend the rest of his life understanding exactly what $5 meant in the context of a $500,000 estate. The education would be permanent, comprehensive, and perfectly proportioned to the behavior that had earned him such precise mathematical consideration from the mother he'd trained to expect nothing while giving her exactly that. But the most satisfying aspect of the completed plan wasn't the justice it represented, but the freedom it provided. For the first time since Harold's death, I was no longer waiting for Marcus to become the appreciative son I'd hoped he might grow into. I was no longer making excuses for behavior that fell short of basic respect, no longer enabling disrespect through continued generosity, no longer hoping that more patience might produce more appreciation. The relationship dynamic had been permanently redefined based on demonstrated reality rather than maternal wishful thinking. Marcus had shown me exactly who he was through consistent behavior. My will acknowledged that demonstration with appropriate consequences that would continue teaching him the same lesson long after I was gone. The $5 coffee card still sat in my safe deposit box, preserved as evidence of the day my son completed my education about the true nature of our relationship. Tomorrow, it would be joined by the legal documents that completed his education about the connection between treatment and consequences, appreciation and reward, respect and inheritance. The mathematical elegance of the whole arrangement satisfied both my analytical mind and my sense of justice. Cause and effect had been restored to a relationship that had operated too long on the assumption that maternal love should be unconditional regardless of how that love was reciprocated or valued by its recipient. Marcus had taught me exactly what I was worth to him. My will would teach him exactly what that lesson was worth in return. The mathematics were perfect, the logic was unassailable, and the consequences would last forever. 6 months passed with the quiet satisfaction that comes from decisions made and consequences set in motion. The seasons changed, from Portland's rainy spring to its brief, glorious summer, and I settled into routines that no longer included making excuses for Marcus's behavior or hoping for improvements that would never materialize. My volunteer work at the women's shelter, literacy program, and occasional visits to St. Vincent's took on new meaning, knowing these organizations would soon have the resources to expand their impact significantly. Marcus called twice during those months, both conversations following the same predictable pattern.
Brief inquiries about my health, updates about his work promotion and Jessica's new job at a marketing firm, casual mentions of their summer vacation plans and the home renovations they were considering. Neither call lasted more than 15 minutes, and both ended with his usual promise to visit soon, a commitment that materialized exactly as often as his previous promises. The calls confirmed what I'd already known. Nothing had changed in Marcus's approach to our relationship. I remained an obligation to be managed with minimal effort, someone whose existence required periodic acknowledgement but no genuine investment of time or emotional energy. His tone carried the same casual disregard that had characterized our interactions for years, the voice of someone who assumed I would always be available whenever he decided my presence might be convenient. During one particularly warm July afternoon, while working in the small garden behind my condo, I found myself thinking about Harold and what he might have said about the inheritance changes I'd implemented. Harold had loved Marcus deeply, but hadn't been blind to his character flaws. We'd discussed our son's increasing sense of entitlement during those final months before Harold's death, worried conversations about whether our generosity was helping or hurting Marcus's development into a responsible adult. "I think we've made things too easy for him, Margaret." Harold's voice echoed in my memory, as clearly as if he were sitting beside me on the garden bench we'd shared during his final summer. Maybe struggle would teach him appreciation in ways comfort never could.
I was genuinely happy about becoming a grandmother, excited about having a grandchild to love and support in ways Marcus had never allowed himself to receive from me. But I was also heartbroken that his first instinct, upon learning he was becoming a father, had been to call and discuss how my estate planning might benefit his family's financial situation. The pregnancy changed nothing about the inheritance decisions I'd made, but it added layers of sadness I hadn't anticipated. This grandchild would grow up never knowing the grandmother who'd wanted to be part of their life, because their father had spent decades demonstrating that family relationships were valuable only insofar as they provided financial or practical benefits. Marcus would receive his $5 inheritance regardless of whether he became the world's most devoted father or continued the pattern of self-centered behavior that had characterized his entire adult life. The mathematical precision of consequences wouldn't be altered by life changes that occurred after those consequences had been finalized through legal documentation. But the baby did make me reconsider one aspect of my estate planning. I drafted a letter to be delivered along with Marcus's inheritance, explaining not just the reasoning behind his $5 bequest, but also my sadness about never being able to develop a relationship with my grandchild because of the relationship dynamic he'd chosen to maintain with me. The letter took weeks to write, going through multiple drafts as I tried to balance honesty with dignity, disappointment with hope that Marcus might someday understand what he'd lost through his choices. The final version was factual rather than emotional, documenting the pattern of behavior that had led to his inheritance while expressing genuine sadness about the grandchild I'd never know because of priorities their father had established long before they were born. Marcus, by the time you read this letter, I will be gone, and you will have received the inheritance that reflects exactly what you demonstrated I was worth to you throughout our relationship. $5 represents the precise mathematical value you assigned to your mother through consistent behavior over many years, culminating in the birthday gift that crystallized everything I needed to understand about your priorities. The remaining $499,995 has been distributed to organizations that serve people who genuinely need support and will genuinely appreciate receiving it. The Portland Women's Shelter, Roosevelt High School's literacy program, and St. Vincent's Patient Assistance Program will use these resources to help others rather than simply accumulating more luxury for people who already have everything they need. I want you to know that I'm sad about never being able to develop a relationship with my grandchild, but I understand that this represents another consequence of the relationship dynamic you chose to maintain with me. Children learn about family relationships by observing their parents' behavior, and your child will learn what you taught them about valuing the people who love you. Perhaps someday you'll understand that inheritance should reflect demonstrated appreciation rather than assumed entitlement, that family relationships require reciprocity rather than simply taking, that respect must be earned through behavior rather than claimed through biology. If that day comes, I hope you'll teach your child lessons about gratitude and consideration that I was never able to successfully teach you. The $5 you'll receive represents not punishment, but precision. You showed me exactly what I was worth to you, and my estate planning honored that assessment with mathematical accuracy. I hope this final lesson helps you understand the connection between treatment and consequences, appreciation and reward, respect and inheritance. Your mother, who loved you enough to let you experience the natural results of your choices. Margaret Whitman. The letter sat in my safe deposit box alongside my will and the coffee cart that had started this entire journey toward accountability and consequences. 3 pieces of paper that told the complete story of how Marcus had taught me to value myself exactly as much as he demonstrated I was worth to him, and how I'd finally learned that lesson well enough to apply it to his inheritance. Winter arrived early in Portland that year, bringing the kind of persistent rain that made indoor activities seem particularly appealing. I spent increasing time reading, organizing photo albums, and writing letters to friends I'd lost touch with over the years. The activities had a valedictory quality, as if I were preparing for some transition I couldn't quite name but sensed approaching. Marcus called twice during the holidays, both conversations brief and focused on their preparations for the baby's arrival. Jessica was doing well, they'd bought a house in Beaverton with excellent schools, they were attending parenting classes and setting up the nursery. The conversations carried the same casual tone he'd always used with me, friendly but distant, informative but not intimate. Neither call included an invitation to visit their new house, see the nursery they were preparing, or discuss my role as a grandmother in their child's life. I was being informed about their activities rather than included in them, updated rather than involved. The pattern continued exactly as it had for years, even as Marcus faced the most significant transition of his adult life. New Year's Eve found me alone in my condo, watching Portland's modest fireworks display through my living room window, while reflecting on a year that had brought the most significant decisions of my widowhood. The inheritance changes were complete, legally protected, and precisely calibrated to reflect demonstrated appreciation rather than assumed obligation. Marcus would soon learn exactly what 39 years of casual disrespect had earned him from a mother he'd trained to expect nothing while giving her exactly that. But I'd also learned something important during those months of implementing consequences and preparing for final accountability. Justice didn't eliminate sadness, logic didn't cure disappointment, and mathematical precision didn't heal the emotional wounds created by relationships that failed to meet reasonable expectations for mutual respect and genuine care. I was satisfied with the decisions I'd made, but heartbroken about the circumstances that had made those decisions necessary. A son who appreciated his mother's sacrifices wouldn't have needed to be taught lessons about consequences through inheritance modifications. A grandchild whose father valued family relationships would have a grandmother involved in their life, rather than someone whose existence had been reduced to a support structure for financial planning purposes. The year ahead would bring Marcus's child into the world, and I would watch from whatever distance he chose to maintain between us. The baby would grow up hearing whatever Marcus decided to tell them about the grandmother they'd never really know, Stories filtered through the perspective of someone who'd valued his mother at $5 and received exactly that amount when she finally stopped enabling his disrespect through continued generosity. February brought news that Jessica had delivered a healthy baby girl 3 weeks early. Marcus called from the hospital, his voice carrying the kind of exhausted excitement that new fathers everywhere experience during those first overwhelming hours of parenthood. "Mom, she's here. Emma Rose, born this morning at 6:47, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, perfect in every way." Jessica did amazingly, and we're both just completely overwhelmed by how much love we feel for this little person. Congratulations, Marcus. I'm so happy for both of you. How is Jessica recovering? Are you both getting any sleep? We're running on pure adrenaline right now, but Jessica is doing great and Emma is already showing signs of being a very alert baby. The nurses say she's unusually responsive for someone so young. We're completely smitten. For the first time in years, Marcus sounded genuinely happy rather than merely satisfied with his circumstances. The love in his voice was unmistakable, and I found myself hoping that becoming a father might teach him lessons about sacrifice and appreciation that his own childhood had failed to provide. When can I meet her, Marcus? I'd love to see Emma and congratulate Jessica in person. The pause that followed my question lasted just long enough to remind me that nothing fundamental had changed in Marcus's approach to managing our relationship. Even becoming a father hadn't shifted his perspective from convenience-based contact to genuine inclusion. "Well, Mom, things are pretty chaotic right now with the new baby routine and Jessica recovering from delivery. We're not really ready for visitors yet, but maybe in a few weeks once we've settled into some kind of schedule. I'll call you when we're ready to have people over." Of course, Marcus. Take all the time you need to adjust to being new parents. I understand that visitors can be overwhelming during those first weeks. But I didn't understand, and Marcus's response confirmed what I had feared about my role in Emma's life.
Other grandparents weren't considered visitors requiring scheduled appointments and advance planning. Other grandparents were family members whose presence during life transitions was welcomed rather than managed, included rather than accommodated. I was being treated like a distant relative whose occasional contact was tolerated rather than treasured, someone whose involvement in Emma's life would be controlled and limited rather than encouraged and celebrated. Marcus had succeeded in extending his pattern of managing our relationship to include my relationship with his daughter. The call ended with promises to send photos and arrange a visit soon, commitments that carried the same casual disregard for follow-through that had characterized his promises throughout our relationship. I would see Emma when Marcus decided her grandmother's presence might be convenient, not when a new family member deserved to be welcomed by everyone who loved her. That evening, I updated the letter in my safe deposit box to include Emma's birth and my sadness about being excluded from my granddaughter's life by the same relationship dynamic that had earned Marcus his $5 inheritance. The baby represented everything I'd hoped to experience during my final years: the joy of watching a new generation grow, the satisfaction of passing on family stories and traditions, the love that flows between grandparents and grandchildren when parents encourage those connections. Instead, Emma would grow up barely knowing the grandmother who'd wanted to be part of her life, because her father had demonstrated that family relationships were valuable only when they served his immediate needs and convenience. The inheritance consequences I'd established would continue long after Marcus became a father, teaching him the same lesson about appreciation and respect that he'd failed to learn during 39 years of unconditional support from his mother. March brought a brief email with photos of Emma and an update about their adjustment to parenthood. The pictures showed a beautiful baby with Harold's eyes and what looked like my chin, features that connected her to family members she'd never know well because of choices her father had made about prioritizing convenience over connection. The email was signed "Love, Marcus, Jessica, and Emma," but the love was a polite closing rather than a genuine expression of the feelings that should exist between mothers and sons, grandmothers and grandchildren. Real love required presence, participation, and priority. Marcus offered none of those things, only the kind of distant acknowledgement that satisfied his obligation to keep me informed without actually including me in their lives.
April arrived with Portland's tentative emergence from winter, cherry blossoms blooming throughout the city, while I continued my volunteer work and maintained routines that no longer included hoping for improvements in my relationship with Marcus. The inheritance consequences were established and legally protected, ready to teach lessons about appreciation and respect that I'd been unable to teach through decades of unconditional generosity. The mathematics remained perfect. $5 of demonstrated appreciation had produced $5 of inheritance, while organizations that served others would receive resources they would use to help people who genuinely need support and would genuinely appreciate receiving it. Marcus would spend the rest of his life understanding exactly what his treatment of me had been worth, while his daughter grew up never knowing the grandmother who'd been excluded from her life by priorities established long before she was born. On a sunny Thursday afternoon while tutoring students at Roosevelt High School, I received a phone call that would accelerate the timeline for implementing consequences I'd been preparing for months. My doctor's office calling to discuss test results that required immediate attention, words that carried the kind of clinical weight that meant everything was about to change very quickly. The conversation was brief and professional, medical terminology delivered with the kind of compassionate efficiency that healthcare professionals use when conveying information that will alter someone's life permanently. Advanced stage, aggressive progression, limited treatment options, time frame measured in weeks rather than months. I thanked Dr. Peterson for her honesty and hung up the phone with the strange calm that sometimes accompanies news too significant to process emotionally in real time. The inheritance consequences I'd established would be implemented sooner than I'd expected, but the timeline didn't affect the mathematical precision of lessons Marcus was about to learn about the connection between treatment and consequences. That evening, I called Patricia's office to discuss expediting the notification process for Marcus's inheritance delivery and ensuring all charitable bequests would be distributed according to my wishes. The legal protections were already in place, the documentation was comprehensive, and the organizations were prepared to receive support that would expand their ability to help people who genuinely needed support. Patricia, I've received some medical news that means my estate planning will be implemented sooner than we anticipated. Can you ensure everything is ready for efficient distribution according to my will? Of course, Margaret. All documents are prepared and legally protected. The charitable organizations have been notified, Marcus's inheritance delivery is arranged through Samuel Morrison's office, and every aspect of your wishes will be honored exactly as you specified. Thank you, Patricia, and thank you for taking my decision seriously rather than trying to convince me to reconsider based on traditional family expectations. Marcus earned his inheritance through consistent behavior over many years. The consequences are appropriate and precisely calibrated. Margaret, in 40 years of estate law practice, I've learned that some parents serve their children best by letting them experience the natural results of their choices. You've made thoughtful, well-documented decisions based on demonstrated behavior rather than wishful thinking. Your son will learn lessons about appreciation and respect that might serve him well as he raises his own daughter. That's my hope, Patricia. Maybe understanding consequences will help Marcus become the kind of father who teaches his daughter to value the people who love her, rather than assuming their love means she can take their support for granted regardless of how she treats them. The conversation concluded with confirmation that everything was ready for implementation whenever circumstances required it. Marcus would receive his $5 inheritance through the same legal channels used for major bequests, emphasizing the permanence and precision of consequences he'd earned through decades of demonstrating exactly what his mother was worth to him. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by photo albums chronicling 39 years of Marcus's life, from the grateful child I'd raised alone to the entitled adult who'd reduced our relationship to occasional obligation management. The pictures told the story of someone who'd been loved unconditionally but had never learned to reciprocate that love with genuine appreciation or respect. Emma's birth photos sat on my coffee table beside Marcus's childhood pictures, representing everything I'd hoped to experience as a grandmother and everything I'd been excluded from because of relationship dynamics established long before she was born. She would grow up hearing whatever Marcus chose to tell her about the grandmother she'd barely known. Stories filtered through the perspective of someone who demonstrated that family relationships were valuable only when they served his immediate needs. The inheritance consequences would teach Marcus lessons I'd been unable to teach through decades of patience and generosity, but they wouldn't give me the opportunity to develop a relationship with Emma or pass on family stories and traditions that connected her to grandparents who'd wanted to be part of her life. Justice and sadness could coexist. Logic and heartbreak could occupy the same emotional space. Mathematical precision and genuine grief could share the same conclusions about relationships that had failed to meet reasonable expectations from mutual respect and care. Marcus had taught me exactly what I was worth to him through consistent behavior spanning decades. My inheritance would teach him exactly what that lesson was worth in return, while organizations that served others would receive support that reflected their appreciation for what they were being given. The education was complete on both sides. Marcus had succeeded in demonstrating his priorities through years of accumulated disrespect. My will would succeed in reflecting those priorities through consequences that would continue teaching him about appreciation and accountability long after I was gone. $5 for $5. Perfect mathematical precision applied to imperfect family relationships, producing results that honored demonstrated values rather than assumed obligations. The lesson would last for the rest of Marcus's life, a permanent reminder of the mother who'd finally learned to value herself exactly as her son had taught her she was worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.